Why now? The answer to that question should provide the impetus for all thoughtful, fair-minded Ohio voters to reject State Issue 1 in Tuesday's special election. The issue is a brazen attempt by Republicans to deny the women of Ohio the right to decide what to do with their own bodies. The goal of the proponents of Issue 1 is to make it much more difficult to pass the reproductive health issue that will appear on the November general election ballot. Issue 1 is an attack on women and the one-person, one-vote foundation of our democracy. It demands to be defeated. But it's not only women's rights and democracy that are in jeopardy. I'm Cynthia Rickard.
And I'm Bertram de Souza, co-host of the Scribbler video podcast and veteran Mahoning Valley journalists. Our guests today are Catherine Tersa, Executive Director of Common Cause Ohio, and Dennis Willard, a longtime journalist and spokesman for the Vote No on Issue 1 campaign. They, along with hundreds of Ohioans, have been at the forefront of an aggressive campaign to defeat Issue 1. Before we bring on our guests, let's watch a YouTube broadcast that delivers a poignant message about Tuesday's special election. The song was written and performed by Bill Cohen, a veteran journalist from Columbus.
From the winding river on the south to the Great Lake Erie shore, from the golden farmlands to the urban core, we love our home, Ohio, may it stay forever free. We'll fight all plans to steal our democracy. We say no. We sing no. We shout no. One person, one vote, that's how our state should stay. The people are sovereign, we won't throw that right away. It's crystal clear before us lies a crucial choice. Let us rise and let all hear the people's voice. We say
Thank you, Catherine and Dennis, for joining us. With the special election on Tuesday, what is your level of confidence that State Issue 1 will be defeated? And Catherine, let me start with you since we've heard from Dennis on previous podcasts.
So I think this is one of those don't tread on me moments. In other words, most people didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the Ohio Constitution. They didn't think about, the rights that they have in the Ohio Constitution. And, what happens when the state legislature tries to take away your rights? You say no. And it's very clear to me that people are out there, they're energized. They're not just voting no, but they're doing the work to educate people about this August special election. And nobody expected an election in August. So I'm so glad people are out there, they're fighting, they're letting their neighbors, their friends know what Issue 1 is and what it actually means for voters.
And Dennis, especially given the early voting and the kind of response. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm following up on what Catherine just said. I think we're very optimistic because they did try to sneak this election past the electorate, and I think people are enraged, they're engaged. What we're finding when we're knocking doors is people are very upset. They feel like the legislature is disrespecting them and thinking that they can be tricked or conned. and they're very awake. So but at the same time, you know, this is Ohio. We have to keep working until the polls close on Tuesday night. And so I think that everyone in our coalition, which is very large, more than 200 organizations representing hundreds of thousands of Ohioans, none of us are going to stop until the polls close on Tuesday night at 7:30.
And Catherine, your organization has been vocal, as Dennis said, that the other hundreds of organizations that are involved in this, in its opposition to State Issue 1. And one of the arguments Common Cause has made is this. Issue 1 is an attempt by powerful legislators to fool voters into giving away their power so politicians can get what they want instead of what the people want. Could you expound on that, please?
Sure. So I think the simple way to think about this is we are being asked as Ohio voters to give away our power, to actually dilute majority rule. You know, for more than 100 years, 111 years, we have had the right to amend the Ohio Constitution by 50% plus one. And that's really important because that's what a majority is. That's what the way that democracy works. Now, if in fact folks go ahead and approve issue 1, that means that a minority of voters would actually decide the direction of the state. They would decide what went into the Ohio Constitution. And that's just not right. It's anti-democratic. And then the other part of the issue 1 proposal that I think that's really important is, yes, we're diluting voter power if we pass it, but issue 1 also dilutes grassroots power. It dilutes our ability to come together, collect signatures, and put our issues on the ballot. And, you know, we know that the citizen initiative is a check on the state legislature. And we know the state legislature doesn't like it.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons I describe this as a power grab. It takes power from the people, and it means that the legislature is the body that makes all the decisions.
And Dennis, and then I'll go to Cindy. You've covered state politics in the state for a long time. Now, I know Common Cause is being diplomatic when it says politicians, but what we're talking about here are actually right-wing Republicans, or the Republican majority. And so what is driving this as far as they're concerned? What are they trying to create in Ohio by this issue and other such issues?
Well, I think it is a power grab by extreme lawmakers. As you know, our districts have failed a constitutional test 4 times. And so what you have is a legislature that is really completely out of touch with everyday Ohioans because they feel no insecurity about losing their next election. They can do things with impunity. And so I think what this is an effort to hold them accountable, because this is really about our ability, when the legislature is going against our will, to go directly to voters and say, you know, do you have different ideas about the direction this state should take? And that's really what's on the line here. But I do want to say something, Bertram and Cynthia. Our coalition, Jen Miller jokingly calls it tripartisan, which is Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, because polling shows that as many as 1 out of 3 Republicans are going to vote no on issue 1. And these are people who respect the process. They respect the institutions of government. And they also understand that they may not always be in the majority. And at times, they may also want to go directly to the voters, which they've done in the past, with issues that matter most to them. So this is really about ensuring that we have a fair democracy that is open to everyone. And I think Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, many of us agree on that idea.
I'm just wondering, listening to both of you, and based on a chat that I found on the Nextdoor app yesterday, have you found that Americans are losing faith in democracy? The chat that I found was some of these people were quoting Bible verses to justify this issue. which sort of indicates that they're moving away from democracy. They want to establish a Christian theocracy in this country, which is pretty frightening to those of us who are not Christian. Are you finding that when you're knocking on doors, talking to people? Have you gotten that sense from anybody?
I have a couple of examples that are very, what I would call disturbing. One is when the resolution was being heard in the Senate committee, Mike Ruley, who is a local senator from your area.
He's our senator, yeah.
Yeah, he said the quiet part out loud. He said that 50+1 is mob rule. And Beth Lear, an extreme lawmaker from my area, who's my representative. Yes. So we share something in common. These are our folks representing us in the State House, and they don't represent me. But Beth Lear was at a rally recently, and she said the same thing, that democracy equals mob rule. We believe that 50+1 equals democracy, and democracy is messy. But I don't know who the great philosopher was who said it was, the best, it's the best government that we've developed so far. I want to hold on to democracy. These are folks who really do want 40% of the people to be able to get their way by blocking the will of the majority. And that's exactly what's on the line here, majority rule.
Well, and essentially, they don't even want the 40% of people. They want themselves to be able to dictate it based on the money that they're getting from outside interests, which I want to hear from you too, Catherine, but that brings me to my next question also about these commercials that are running that are infuriating me, talking about how passage of issue 1 will prevent outside interests from having a hand in government when in fact it's completely opposite. So Catherine, I just wanted to know what you're finding or what your people are finding when you're knocking on doors. Are you finding people who are moving away from democracy and starting to favor a Christian theocracy?
I think that there are a lot of people that are anxious about the direction of this country. And there are people, that, for example, are focusing more on religion. They're focusing more on, how can I put this? The hope that someone will come and take care of it for them. So, and I think, when we think about some of the trends that are happening, we're talking about authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that's infuriating to me has to do with the whole, oh my gosh, they're outside special interests. Well, wait a second. Our state legislature has a history of engaging in the most corrupt behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
And all we have to do is think about Larry Householder and his arrest and sentencing and all we have to do is think about that, and you can go back and you can think of ECOT, and you can go back further to CoinGate. We have a long history of corruption in state government, and we deserve a lot better. And for many years, I have been calling on the state legislature, at this point more than 10 years, calling on them to create greater transparency in elections, meaning create the ability to follow the money.
Yes.
So this whole, oh my goodness, special interests are trying to influence the Ohio Constitution. You have had 10 years since Citizens United to actually change the law, legislators. They have not chosen to do that. Instead, they're acting like there's some kind of, boogeyman that's out there that's, I don't know, from another state that's trying to make us California or something crazy.
Yeah.
And I do understand that can resonate with some voters, but all they have to do is take a step back and say to themselves, well, wait a second, why is it that they're acting like they're helpless when they make the law?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in regards to that and the outside interests, let me read a paragraph to both of you from an Associated Press piece that was very well done. And the paragraph says, Protect Women Ohio, the campaign against the fall abortion issue, is airing pro-issue 1 ads suggesting that abortion rights proponents at work in the state, quote, encourage minors to get sex change surgeries and want to trash parental consent. Now, the AP writes, the fall abortion amendment would protect access to various forms of reproductive health care, but makes no mention of gender surgery. And the attorneys who wrote the Ohio parental consent law says it would not be affected. However, the proponents, including state lawmakers, are still pushing this lie.
Yeah.
And it seems to be getting traction because honestly,
they're-
I got a local person
Yeah.
who sent me a text, and she's a woman asking me, how should I vote on this? Because the place where she works, people were coming in and saying, oh, they're going to affect minors and they're going to take away rights of parents, and they're buying into this thing. So could you respond to that, please?
And especially to the commercial that is the woman is
Right.
claiming that. She's very folksy, very homey, and the commercial is running every 10 minutes.
Go ahead, Dennis, start with you, and then we go to Catherine.
Well, I would just say that, I mean, this is what happens in campaigns. We, from the beginning, when we started fighting this in Lame Duck in 22, we have stayed on the same idea, which is we're going to protect the majority rule and the sacred principle of one person, one vote. And we actually believe that we're the ones that, with a no vote, are protecting and saving our Constitution. But at the same time, we have not changed our message. The other side every week has a different message because each of their messages has failed to date to move the majority to vote for them. And this is the last, to me, this is the last desperate attempt to just pull out every lie, every hysterical idea, everything possible to scare people into voting for them. The problem is that, somebody asked me about their commercials. I said they can air them, but that doesn't mean it's going to fly. People are smarter than this. They're seeing through this. They know that when the government says to you, hey, we're going to protect you by making it more difficult for you to do something, people are not stupid. They're like seeing right through that. Now, some people have their own agenda, and I think for their own agenda purposes, they're going to vote yes on this. But we believe that that is a minority, a very small percentage of voters in this state. So really the question becomes, can we turn out our no voters at a larger rate than them? And we believe we can, but that's what this has always been about, not a persuasion campaign as much as an awareness and turn out the vote campaign. And we have 200 plus organizations that are working diligently every day, knocking doors, making phone calls, writing postcards, doing everything they can to raise awareness and turn out that vote.
Catherine?
Yeah, when you don't actually have a sensible plan or a sensible proposal, you're left with saying things that are ridiculous. And that's what we see on these ads. They don't have a good reason for changing the Ohio Constitution. We know this is unnecessary. The last time there was a citizen initiative on the ballot was in 2018. The last successful one, highlighting how kind of cautious Ohioans are, was in 2018, and it was about victims' rights. So the other way to think about this is, since the casino amendment in 2015, Ohioans approved reforms essentially saying, hey, we're going to stop any monopolies, oligopolies, cartels that want to go into the Ohio Constitution. So that's now part of the Ohio Constitution. There are protections there already. Oh, and by the way, this passed by 51.33%. So they don't have logical things to say, so they say nonsense.
Cindy?
Well, the other ad that I keep seeing is, the other commercial I keep seeing is the physician who comes on and talks about what's actually in the bill and urges everyone to go and read it for themselves, because after she read it and realized what groups were supporting the no vote, she's voting yes. Can you address what is actually in the bill? I've already voted, so I read it. It seemed pretty simple to me, but if you could just elaborate on that for our viewers. Catherine.
So it is pretty simple. It changes the passage rate for any amendment to the Ohio Constitution from 50% plus 1 to a passage of 60%. So, the reason we're worried about that is it leaves, 40% of folks to stop things, leaving a minority in charge of what goes into the Ohio Constitution. It also makes it harder to do citizen initiatives. I care a lot about that because, of course, I've actually used the signature gathering method to try to advance reforms, redistricting reforms specifically.
Right.
But the citizen initiative is this check on the state legislature where groups can come together, collect signatures, and put an issue directly before the voter. They call that direct democracy. What issue 1 does is it makes it so that as opposed to 44 counties, they require 5% of the gubernatorial vote, the last gubernatorial vote, in 44 counties right now. This would move it to 88 counties, meaning every single county. Now, I want to be super clear. It is not easy to do citizen initiatives. It's incredibly hard work. I've once described it as more painful than divorce. Like, it is just this incredible uphill battle and this tangle of paperwork. And as powerful as it is to talk to voters, it is so hard to do. And yes, I actually think, 44 of the 88 counties is reasonable because then you get buy-in from counties all over the state. You're not just, relying on just a few counties. You're branching out. But if you move this to 88 of the 88 counties, it's going to nearly make it impossible to do citizen initiatives. Functionally, we will have the right to do a citizen initiative, but we won't be able to actually do it. Now, the third thing that they did, which is incredibly draconian, is they actually, in issue 1, what they want to do is eliminate the cure period. Now, essentially, this is a period of 10 days in which an effort, meaning the citizen-led grassroots folks, have an additional 10 days if they fall short, if they don't quite have enough signatures. They have 10 more days to collect those additional signatures. Now, you might say, oh, well, hey, why would they have trouble with this? They should just get the right number of signatures. Until you realize you're talking about nearly 500,000 signatures. And it would be horrible to, not have enough, let's say 100 or 2. You start to imagine, there's a reason there is this additional signature gathering period. It's there to be fair, and it's incredibly draconian, and will in fact make all sorts of folks say, hey, I want to address something. I'm trying to get the legislature's attention, but we can't do a citizen initiative because it would be too hard if issue 1 passes.
Dennis, do you have anything to add?
That was great.
Yeah.
I was just thinking.
You should take that. Use it as a clip.
I know. That was fantastic. Well, what I would say is I'm going to echo what Betty Montgomery, the Republican former Attorney General and former state auditor, said. She calls this the unholy triumvirate of issues that will doom constitutional amendments by everyday people like us in Ohio. Together, apart, these are bad enough. But she looks at this and says, look, 60% plus 88 counties plus no cure period plus a special election in August. She says she's not a conspiracy person, but this certainly smells bad. So I think that this is an effort to really take away our constitutional rights that we've had for 111 years. And again, I think voters are wise to it. Voters are showing up already and voting early in line by absentee ballot, and they're going to show up on election day and vote no on issue 1.
Okay, for those voters who are waiting to go to the polls on Tuesday, like I am, for some reason I like to go to the polls on election day. Give us the most compelling arguments that you can as to why a no vote is essential, and in the context of for a lot of people, this is an esoteric issue. They don't, I mean, you know who you're voting for if you go to vote for in the mayor's race, or council, or state rep, or whatever, or Congress. But an issue like this, where people don't think about it daily, how should they think about this as they go to the polls on Tuesday? And Catherine, I'll start with you.
Well, I always say if it's not broke, you don't need to fix it. And so in other words, we have had, 50% plus one majority rule for more than 110 years, and there's no reason to make this change. And that folks should not give up their power. At the end of the day, this is all about diluting voter power. So do not give up your power. This is a power grab.
And Dennis, you've covered state government for a long time. And you covered a lot of the constitutional amendments that were put forth, important ones, especially by Republican governors. So speak to that, if you will, as to what the current system has given Ohio as far as constitutional amendments.
Well, I'm just going to give you some examples. I mean, if you look around the Mahoning Valley and if you see new school buildings that have been built since the 90s, that's due to a constitutional amendment. The state was never in a partnership with local school districts prior to the 90s. They got into that partnership, and there are now 1,200 new school buildings that are air conditioned, they're safer for students, they're better learning environments, 1,200 new school buildings. But there's even more than that. Right now, as you know, the Mahoning Valley is trying desperately to come back from the loss of Lordstown. And there's a lot of efforts to bring, to transform it into the Voltage Valley. Mm-hmm. The state, any investments from the state into the valley to do that would have to come through voter approval for the state to invest, to basically sell bonds, raise money, and invest in the valley. We're seeing that here in Columbus, where I live, with Intel. Yep. We're seeing that in southwestern Ohio with the expansion of Honda in Jeffersonville towards Cincinnati. But the fact is the voters, will be tying the hands of lawmakers and the governor to invest in the state. That's why in many ways, this is really short-sighted on behalf of these lawmakers, because they're really cutting off their nose to spite their face here. And I promise you, in a short period of time, they're the ones that are going to be looking at each other saying, what have we done? And how do we undo this if this passes? But again, I'm very confident it's not going to pass. I think voters are smart. I think they're aware of what's happening here. As Catherine said, I would say to somebody, when was the last time a politician told you, hey, I'm going to help you out by taking away some of your rights? Mm-hmm. I mean, it just doesn't pass the smell test. Voters are onto it. Of course, there's a small group of voters who have single-minded purposes in mind, but for the vast majority of voters, they're going to reject this. Our job is to make them aware of what's happening, get them out to the polls.
In making them aware, I'm wondering, do the voters understand that this issue basically moves us toward authoritarianism? Because it puts all of the power in the hands of the legislators already in office. Are you getting a sense that voters understand that?
So one of the things that I would say is that when I talk to voters about kind of playground rules, okay, they don't like how things are going, so they want to change the rules. They want to create a special election in August to change the rules to actually make it harder for voters to amend the Ohio Constitution and to take away their powers. So I do think they understand that diluting their power is a step towards authoritarianism, even if they don't use those words. Even if they, they're not necessarily like, did you notice that we're taking a step towards authoritarianism? No one is saying that. But they get, hey, these folks want to change the rules to benefit themselves and make it harder for us. So they get their playing games.
Well,
and they get that.
Your organization has a tagline of something like holding power accountable, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and so this issue absolutely removes voters' ability to hold anybody in state legislature accountable, or really in state office, because they're working in conjunction with each other. So if they're not using authoritarianism, maybe they understand it in that sense. Dennis, what do you?
They do understand it in that sense. I also think we're living in a time period where the challenge, not just of Common Cause, but of all of us, is holding power accountable.
Yeah.
That it is a challenge. You know, I believe in the power and promise of democracy, but I also believe that our challenge right now is holding power accountable.
Yeah. Dennis?
I think you're making a really good point. I agree with Catherine. I don't think the average person walks around and uses the word authoritarianism. I'm not sure I can pronounce it. But I will say that there are people who are frightened or concerned, gravely concerned about the encroachment of government into their lives, into their everyday lives. And so this is happening. This is a power play to so that they're immune to the voters and they can do whatever they want. You know, again, I keep quoting Betty Montgomery, but she's just has said so many smart things about this. And, you know, she says, we had the House Bill 6 scandal because the FBI came in and investigated Larry Householder and Matt Borges and others. The Akron Beacon Journal recently editorialized and said we should not use the FBI as our checks and balances in government. Right now, with the Supreme Court, the legislature, the governor, the statewide offices, all working together. Now we have lawmakers, individual lawmakers who oppose this, but the leadership in the legislature all support this. So what is the check and balance to government right now? The check and balance is the people. And it's hard for the people to be a check and balance when the districts are so gerrymandered, and so that the incumbents are reelected without having to face any true opposition. So we are the checks and balances. And right now they know this is an incredible check and balance on their power, and they're trying to remove that. We're trying to keep that so that we can continue to check and balance them in the future.
As an aside, talking about Larry Householder, the federal prosecutors, one of them made the comment that it wasn't just this elaborate bribery scheme and all of that, but there are legislators right now who benefited from this bribery scheme, who were elected as a result of Larry Householder funneling money into their campaigns. It's like, they're the fruit of the poison tree, and I'm waiting to see at what point they're going to be identified and pointed to as saying, hey, you benefited from this corrupt speaker who's sort of the largest bribery scheme in the history of Ohio. But, we'll maybe have a conversation about that at some other time, Dennis. But although the reproductive rights issue is getting a lot of attention and has been cojoined into the state issue 1, in fact, the Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, who's the chief elections officer in the state of Ohio, at one point said that the issue was, quote, a win for good government that protects Ohioans from out-of-state special interests. But then he turns around and, according to the Associated Press, in a Lincoln Day speech in May, he said, quote, Lincoln Day in May, and he said in August, he said, quote, is 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution. So let's talk about the chief elections officer who is responsible for ensuring fair elections in the state, being so deeply involved in this. Does that worry you both as to what could occur given his investment in this issue? And Catherine, go ahead, because I know Common Cause is concerned about fair and honest elections.
So it is clear that the state legislature passed this for political expediency. that they wanted to change the rules because they had their eye on what was happening in November. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to only focus on one issue that's coming up and change the rules and, you know, change democracy because you want to stop something. It's ridiculous. I also think it highlights how, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but just how, when I said there were no sensible arguments earlier, you know, both of the arguments are ridiculous. Both, whether you're saying it's 100% about abortion or whether, you know, Frank LaRose is saying, oh, there's special interest and we need to protect the Ohio Constitution. It is challenging to have a chief election official who is the chief cheerleader for taking away voting rights. Yeah. Right? I mean,
yes.
He is the chief cheerleader for diluting our power. And this is really problematic. It is hard to have faith in an election system in which the chief election official really has his hand on the scale. Now, I do believe that because of bipartisan election administration, I do believe because of how transparent our election system is, that in fact, it'll be a fair election. But I'm not surprised when people wonder and get concerned because we do not expect and we have not seen a Secretary of State take this active a role in a campaign.
Dennis, speak to that, please.
Yeah, I was surfing TV the other night, the internet, cable, and I came across a show called Shameless, and I thought, someone do a documentary about Frank LaRose? So I mean, he just from you know, look, going back to 2011 on Senate Bill 5, the effort to take away collective bargaining rights for 350,000 public employees, he promised that he was a no vote. Then he walked on the Senate floor and voted yes. So we've known for a long time that he has no credibility, he has no shame, and that he will say anything and do anything to get elected. He is really the worst kind of elected person we can have in Ohio because he has no moral compass. And you see that now. He, you know, claims that Ohio had fair elections, but then supports the ex-president's claims that the election was stolen. You can't do both of those things. You know, he says, as you read in his statements, he says that August elections are costly and low voter turnout, and now he's for them. So it's just a continuation. I mean, we joke that he gets up in the morning, takes a poll to decide what tie he should read for the day, wear for the day. And so I just think now, again, he's going to appeal to a certain type of voter in Ohio, and that's what he's really going for, because in the midst of all this, he announces he's running for the U.S. Senate against Sherrod Brown. Right. I mean, his ambition is unbridled, and so I think that, you know, again, for the average common sense thinking person looking at Frank LaRose, they would have to find him to be laughable, except that he is the chief elections officer in Ohio, and he is not taking that responsibility, his oath to office, his oath to the Constitution seriously, and it's really a crime against the citizens of this state.
Yeah.
Anything?
I actually work the polls, and I went for training recently, which we do before every election. And they've made two essential changes this time that we all made note of. And one is that you must now provide a photo ID. No longer can you use utility bills or whatever else. But the second one is something that we had asked about at the last election, which is there any prohibition against carrying a gun into the poll or any kind of weapon? And the elections officials that were training us the last time seemed a bit caught off guard and surprised that that question was even being asked. This time they are going to post a sign on that cardboard thing that they have at every poll saying that no weapons allowed. And the elections officials told us that they are not expecting much of a turnout at the polls. And I'm wondering what the two of you think about that in terms of, I imagine you're kind of keeping a tab on early voting, but what do you think the polls are going to be like for this election? Catherine?
So I think all we really need to do is look at kind of the enthusiasm of early vote and know that people are going to show up on election day. And actually, this is something that I worried about, like in May when the state legislature, passed Senate Joint Resolution 2, but became issue 1. I was like, oh my gosh, people will be on vacation. People will be getting their kids ready for school. Like all of the things, like I was like, an August election, this is insane. So I was very worried that they were just trying to sneak an election past the electorate and that folks wouldn't know. Now, what is clear is that we all know, obviously we need to continue our job and educate people and make sure they know, but we are out there and folks are voting. What is a worry, you talked about the kind of photo ID. This is our first statewide election with the new rules for voting. And those new rules do include, photo ID. They also include, there's no early vote on that Monday before the election. Now that Monday before the election is a little bit like, closing the store on Christmas Eve, right?
Yeah.
Like we need to get ready for Christmas, so we're closing the store. So, so a lot of times people will say, oh, they didn't really take advantage of that Monday. No, they did. Like all you had to do is look at the numbers. People used that Monday before the election. So there are new rules in place in this August special election. So it is really important for voters to know that they need to have photo ID. They can vote provisionally if they don't have everything that they need, but then they're going to still have to take additional steps to get their ID there, get, all of the things. Now there are organizations like Vote Riders that are helping people make sure that they have ID. So, as folks are thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have this, you can get free state ID at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Sometimes it's underlying documents that are an issue. And I think we will have a sense from this election about what kind of obstacle this photo ID actually is.
Dennis?
Yeah, I think, clearly there is a well thought out effort to suppress the vote, in Ohio. And unfortunately, our chief elections officer, Frank LaRose, is part of that effort. He signs on to it, he agrees to it, and the legislature passes these further restrictions. This is why it's so important. This is why it's so important for us to have a checks and a balance effort and ability with our government, because the only way we're going to undo this is if we come together and go directly to the voters. That is going to start with some efforts with of good government reform that we have on the horizon, but it also means that that we take back the things that we define the state the way we want it to be, rather than them defining it in ways that work for them. That's really what's at stake here, and that's why they're trying to raise this to a 60% threshold. That's why they're expanding it to 88 counties. That's why they are taking away the cure period, because they want to put up these obstacles to us having a checks and balance on our government. I just think voters are going to show up and say no. Yes, there will be confusion. They're shutting down polling places. They're changing polling places. There will be people who show up with utility bills because they didn't get the message, and they'll be angry and upset. Hopefully they come back and vote. These are all things that Frank LaRose is doing purposefully, but we still think he's not going to be successful. And then after we win on Tuesday, we're going to continue to win, and we're going to beat back against these anti-democratic efforts by Frank LaRose and others.
And while the reproductive health issue has generated a lot of interest, there are some other issues or some other topics that are being looked at that would lend themselves to constitutional amendment. And they're important ones that affect all of Ohio. And so could you speak to some of those, Catherine? What else is being talked about as being on the ballot that would be in jeopardy if State Issue 1 passes?
So, as we look forward to November, we will have on the ballot reproductive rights. We'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And that's an important thing for
Right.
all Ohioans to consider, and how do they want to address that. And, it is important that we've moved from, what is legal because the Ohio Supreme, the U.S. Supreme Court says it, to say, hey, this choice is in our hands. So
Right.
that's exciting. The other thing to think about is that there are reforms that we'd like to do. So, for example, redistricting reform that I mentioned earlier. I've often thought that the only way that we're actually going to create more transparency, we're going to actually address dark money, is through a signature collection effort. So that's another thing to think about. The other thing has to do with that people are collecting signatures for right now is minimum wage.
Yes.
Minimum wage passed not by 60% in 2006. And one of the things that's important is the federal government has not moved that in years and years. And as we all know, inflation has just gone up and up. Dennis, anything you wanted to add?
Dennis?
I just think that, we've had this right for 111 years. And as Catherine said earlier, why would we give it away? And regardless of what the issue du jour is, the fact is that if there is something that the majority of voters in this state want to do, and the legislature ignores us, then we should be able to go to the voters and ask them, do you approve of this or not? The voters have been judicious during the last 111 years. They've only passed 1 out of 4 of these. So it's not like, you put these on the ballot. First of all, they're hard to get on the ballot. You put them on the ballot and they pass easily. You have to make a compelling case for them. But I think, for example, the issue of reproductive rights on the ballot in November, why shouldn't that be something that the voters of Ohio come together, debate, and then make a decision on? That is a perfect example of
Right.
that. And should that be a simple majority? Should that be a situation where one team scores 59 points, the other team scores 41, and the team that has 41 points
Right.
wins? I mean, that's not the democracy that I was taught in Youngstown city schools, and it's not the democracy I believe in. I think that democracy equals 50 plus 1.
Finally, we do thank you both for joining us. Briefly give us your best closing argument for a no vote on Tuesday. And I'll start with you, Catherine.
I encourage everyone to vote no to stop this power grab. Issue 1 dilutes voter power, and it's taking away our ability to come together to do citizen-led ballot measures.
Dennis?
Again, when was the last time a politician told you, hey, I'm going to help you by taking away a right and a freedom that you've had for 111 years? It doesn't pass the smell test. The fact is you should hold on to your right to majority rule. You should fight to preserve the sacred principle of one person, one vote by voting no on issue 1 on August 8th.
Well, thank you both again. Appreciate the time. Dennis, as always, you've done several of these with us. Nice meeting you, Catherine. Cindy and I have spent...
I can't believe you keep asking me back. I just want you to know.
No, it's always fascinating. And Cindy and I have spent the last several months focused on this issue because of how important it is. We're both Bertram journalists like Dennis. And we hope that, people are paying attention. Because if ever there was a time in Ohio's political history where people need to pay attention, it is today with what's going on in the state. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks, both
Thank you.
of you.
Well, thank you.
Nice to meet you, Catherine. Bye, Dennis.
Bye, Dennis.
You
We'll
too.
talk again. Tuesday is D-Day, Decision Day in Ohio. The outcome of the special election will speak volumes about the state's politics. We cannot leave anything to chance. A no vote on State Issue 1 will, first and foremost, ensure that women do not become second-class citizens. I thank my guest, Catherine Tursa, Executive Director of Common Cause Ohio, and Dennis Willard, spokesman for the Vote No campaign. I also thank my co-host, Cynthia Rickard. This video podcast is streamed on YouTube, Facebook, WFMJ.com, and other digital platforms. Please hit the subscribe and share buttons. My special thanks to Andy Kunkel, the producer, technical director, and videographer of this podcast. I'm Bertram de Souza, author of No Holds Barred, that reflects my 40 years at the now closed Youngstown Vindicator. The book is available at scribblergroup.com and Barnes & Noble in Boardman. Have a pleasant day.